In the Heat of the Night was more than a crime
drama in the
It
late
was a series
1980s.
that captured the
But
soul,
behind Carroll O'Connor's
but no one
commanding
expected those
performance
themes to
was a
become
cast
real
marked by
for some of the
heartbreak,
actors themselves,
addiction,
away
and
with heartbreaking
unimaginable
final
tragedy.
chapters.
Fame
And
did
once
not
you
save
learn
them.
what really
In
happened,
fact, for some, it magnified the darkness they carried inside, pushing them toward endings more devastating than any crime depicted in the fictional streets of Sparta, Mississippi. Nearly 30 years after the final episode aired, their stories remain so haunting that once you hear them, you'll never watch this groundbreaking series the same way again. The show tackled racism, injustice, and moral complexity with unflinching honesty, but the real battles fought by its stars were waged far from the cameras.
In the Heat of
In
the Night was
hospital
more
rooms,
than a crime
courtrooms,
drama.
in the
It was a
suffocating
series that
silence of
captured the
personal
soul,
despair.
but no one
What you're
expected
about
those
to
themes to
discover
become
will
real
forever
for some of
change
the
how you
actors
remember
themselves.
This beloved classic. Cast member 1, Carroll O'Connor. Carroll O'Connor was born on August 1, 1924 in Manhattan, New York, the son of a lawyer who expected him to follow a more traditional path. He was 63 years old when he stepped into the role of Chief Bill Gillespie, the complex Southern police chief whose transformation from casual bigot to champion of justice became the moral backbone of In the Heat of the Night. Already a television legend from his portrayal of Archie Bunker in All in the Family, O'Connor brought gravitas and depth to a character that could have been a caricature in lesser hands. But behind the accolades and the multiple Emmy nominations was a father carrying an unbearable weight. O'Connor's personal life had been marked by stability for decades. A long marriage to Nancy Fields, theatrical success and professional respect. But beneath that foundation lurked a terror that would consume his final years. His adopted son, Hugh, had battled drug addiction for years, a struggle that O'Connor fought alongside him with every resource available. The actor became an advocate, speaking publicly about addiction, funding treatment programs, and desperately trying to save his boy from the grip of heroin. Yet despite his fame, despite his wealth, despite his unwavering love, O'Connor was powerless against the disease that had claimed his son's autonomy. As the years passed through the 1990s, O'Connor watched his son spiral deeper into addiction. Hugh's struggles intensified, and the family's private anguish became increasingly difficult to contain. O'Connor threw himself into his work on In the Heat of the Night, perhaps finding solace in the fictional problems he could solve as Chief Gillespie, even as his real-life crisis defied resolution. The cruel irony was not lost on him. He played a lawman who could restore order to a broken town, yet couldn't save his own child from self-destruction. In 1995, just as the series concluded its 7-season run, Hugh O'Connor took his own life at the age of 32, dying from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his home in Pacific Palisades. Carroll O'Connor died on June 21, 2001, at the age of 76 from a heart attack complicated by diabetes. But those who knew him understood that part of him had died 6 years earlier in that Pacific Palisades home. The man who had made millions laugh as Archie Bunker and think deeply as Bill Gillespie spent his final years as a crusader against the drug dealers he blamed for his son's death, channeling grief into advocacy but never finding peace. A monumental talent, a television icon, yet ultimately a father who couldn't escape the most devastating tragedy any parent can face. Cast member 2, Howard Rollins, Howard Ellsworth. Rollins Jr. was born on October 17, 1950 in Baltimore, Maryland, into a working-class family that recognized his extraordinary gifts early. He was 37 years old when he stepped into the role of Detective Virgil Tibbs, the brilliant and dignified Philadelphia detective whose partnership with Chief Gillespie formed the emotional core of In the Heat of the Night. Rollins arrived at the series already bearing impressive credentials, an Academy Award nomination for Ragtime, and critical acclaim that marked him as one of the most promising black actors of his generation. Yet beneath the poised exterior and the commanding screen presence, Rollins was already engaged in a battle that would ultimately destroy everything he had built. His struggles with substance abuse began quietly, masked by professionalism and talent, but the demons he fought were relentless. Colleagues noticed occasional absences, unexplained mood shifts, and moments when the brilliant actor seemed somewhere else entirely. The entertainment industry, for all its progressive storylines about justice and equality, offered little real support for a black actor facing personal crisis. Rollins felt the crushing pressure of representation. He wasn't just playing Virgil Tibbs, he was supposed to be a symbol, a breakthrough, a credit to his race. The weight of those expectations, combined with whatever internal anguish he carried, proved toxic. As the years passed through the early 1990s, Rollins' addiction escalated into a devastating pattern of arrests, relapses, and increasingly desperate attempts at recovery. In 1988, he was arrested for driving under the influence. In 1991, more arrests followed, and his personal life became tabloid fodder, each headline chipping away at the dignity his character represented on screen. The producers of In the Heat of the Night tried to help him, alternating between intervention and accommodation, but his behavior became increasingly erratic. By 1993, despite being the co-lead of a successful series, Rollins was written out of the show, his character's departure explained with vague references to assignments elsewhere. The truth was far grimmer. Howard Rollins had become unemployable, his talent subsumed by addiction that no amount of second chances could overcome. Howard Rollins died on December 8, 1996, at the age of 46 from complications related to lymphoma, his body weakened by years of substance abuse and his immune system compromised beyond recovery. The man who had embodied dignity, intelligence, and moral clarity as Virgil Tibbs spent his final years in a tragic spiral of legal troubles, health deterioration, and squandered potential. Hollywood barely noticed his passing. There were no career tributes, no retrospectives celebrating his Academy Award-nominated performance. A tragic fate for someone who had once seemed destined for greatness. His story a brutal reminder that talent alone cannot overcome the devastating force of addiction. Cast member 3, Anne Marie Johnson. Anne Marie Johnson was born on July 18, 1960 in Los Angeles, California, into a family deeply rooted in the entertainment capital where dreams are manufactured and often shattered. She was 28 years old when she stepped into the role of Althea Tibbs, the supportive wife of Detective Virgil Tibbs, and one of the few fully realized black female characters on television at the time. Johnson arrived at In the Heat of the Night with a growing resume that included roles in What's Happening Now and numerous guest appearances, representing a new generation of black actresses demanding more than stereotypical roles. But behind the professional smile and the carefully cultivated image of success was a woman navigating an industry that remained fundamentally hostile to black women, regardless of talent or beauty. Johnson watched as her co-star Howard Rollins descended into addiction and professional ruin, bearing witness to a tragedy she was powerless to prevent. The set that should have been a place of creative fulfillment became shadowed by Rollins' increasingly erratic behavior and eventual departure. For Johnson, who had built her character's storylines around being Virgil Tibbs' wife, Rollins' exit essentially gutted her narrative purpose. The producers made efforts to give Althea independent storylines, but the damage was done. She was defined by a relationship with a character who was no longer present. As the years passed through the mid-1990s and beyond, Johnson found herself trapped in the familiar purgatory of moderately successful black actresses, too visible to disappear entirely, too pigeonholed to break through to leading roles. She continued working steadily, accumulating television credits in shows like Jag and The In-Between, but the career trajectory that had seemed so promising in the late 1980s never materialized into stardom. Hollywood's promises of diversity and opportunity proved hollow, and Johnson became another talented performer, grinding through an industry that celebrated her contributions in speeches while denying her opportunities in practice. The weight of being a pioneering black actress on a groundbreaking show became a burden rather than a launching pad. Anne Marie Johnson is still alive today at 64 years old, continuing to work and advocate for better representation in Hollywood, but her story carries its own quiet tragedy. Unlike the sudden, dramatic endings of some of her castmates, Johnson's heartbreak has been the slow burn of unrealized potential, of being present for a groundbreaking series that somehow didn't translate into the career opportunities that white actresses with similar credentials routinely received. The industry that celebrated her work on In the Heat of the Night offered little beyond more supporting roles, more guest appearances, more reminders that for black actresses, Even being part of television history isn't enough to guarantee a future. Her struggle isn't one of addiction or early death, but of survival in an industry designed to use and discard talent that doesn't fit narrow commercial formulas. Cast member 4. Hugh O'Connor. Hugh O'Connor was born on April 7, 1962, in Rome, Italy, and adopted as an infant by Carroll O'Connor and his wife Nancy. Brought into a family of privilege, artistic excellence, and towering expectations. He was 32 years old when his life ended, having never escaped the shadow of his legendary father or the addiction that consumed his adult years. Though Hugh appeared in several episodes of In the Heat of the Night in small roles, his connection to the series was primarily through his father's starring role, a constant reminder of the success he struggled to achieve independently. But behind the advantages of his upbringing, the connections, the opportunities, the O'Connor name, was a young man drowning in heroin addiction and crushing self-doubt. Hugh's struggles began in his teenage years and intensified throughout his 20s, despite multiple attempts at rehabilitation and his parents' desperate interventions. He married Angela O'Connor and had a son, but even fatherhood couldn't break addiction's grip. The entertainment industry, which had opened doors for him solely because of his surname, offered no real support when those doors led nowhere. Hugh worked sporadically as an actor and stage technician, but his life had become defined by the cycle of addiction. Brief periods of sobriety shattered by relapses that grew increasingly dangerous. As the years passed into the mid-1990s, Hugh's condition deteriorated despite his family's unwavering efforts to save him. Carroll O'Connor, one of television's most powerful figures, discovered that fame and wealth were meaningless against the disease destroying his son. Hugh's marriage strained under the weight of his addiction. His relationship with his young son became compromised by his inability to maintain sobriety. The man who should have had every advantage, financial security, industry connections, a support system most addicts never access, found himself in the same desperate place as any junkie on the street, proving that addiction recognizes no privilege. Hugh O'Connor died on March 28, 1995, at the age of 32 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his home in Pacific Palisades, ending his suffering but condemning his father to a grief that would define Carroll O'Connor's final years. The young man had called his father that day, high and distraught, and Carroll had rushed to his home, arriving to find his son had already made his final, irreversible decision. A devastating end for someone born into every advantage. His story a brutal reminder that addiction is a disease that can claim anyone, regardless of privilege, love, or opportunity. Hugh O'Connor's tragedy rippled through his family and the In the Heat of the Night cast, a private horror that made every subsequent episode a painful reminder of what had been lost. Cast member 5. Alan Autry. Carlos. Alan Autry was born on July 31, 1952 in Shreveport, Louisiana, a former professional football player who reinvented himself as an actor and stepped into the role of Captain Bubba Skinner when he was 36 years old. His character, the loyal and sometimes comically earnest officer, provided moments of levity in a series often dealing with heavy racial and social themes. Autry came to In the Heat of the Night after a modest career as a Green Bay Packers quarterback and various television guest appearances, representing the kind of second-act success story Hollywood occasionally allows. But behind the seemingly uncomplicated persona of a former athlete turned actor was a man who would later reveal deep disillusionment with the entertainment industry and the values it represented. Autry's experience on In the Heat of the Night was marked by his close friendship with Howard Rollins and the profound sadness of watching his co-star's public destruction. He witnessed firsthand how the industry that profited from Rollins' talent offered little genuine support when that talent was threatened by addiction. The hypocrisy aided Autry. The show preached justice and equality, while its own practices told a different story. As the years passed beyond the series' conclusion in 1995, Autry made a decision that stunned Hollywood. He essentially walked away from acting to pursue politics, eventually serving as the mayor of Fresno, California, from 2000 to 2009. His political career was marked by conservative values and sometimes controversial statements that seemed worlds away from the progressive themes of in the heat of the night. Some saw this transformation as betrayal. Others understood it as the choice of a man who had seen behind Hollywood's curtain and found it morally bankrupt. Autry became increasingly vocal about his Christian faith and his belief that the entertainment industry was fundamentally corrupt, driven by greed rather than the social values it claimed to champion. Alan Autry is still alive today at 71 years old, living largely outside the spotlight that once defined his existence, but his story carries the tragedy of profound disillusionment. Unlike his castmates who died young or struggled with addiction, Autry's heartbreak was philosophical. The death of belief in an industry he had once hoped would be a force for good. The man who played the loyal Bubba Skinner discovered that loyalty in Hollywood was a one-way street, that the progressive values espoused on screen rarely translated to how the industry treated its own people. His departure from acting wasn't a retirement. It was an escape from a world he could no longer stomach, making him a different kind of casualty, one who survived physically but lost faith in the dream that had brought him to television in the first place. Nearly 30 years later, In the Heat of the Night remains a groundbreaking television drama that confronted racism and injustice with unprecedented honesty and nuance. Yet the real lives behind it are far more tragic than any crime solved in Sparta, Mississippi. From Carroll O'Connor's devastating loss of his son to Howard Rollins' addiction-fueled downfall, from Anne Marie Johnson's quiet struggle against industry prejudice to Hugh O'Connor's ultimate surrender to demons he couldn't defeat, every member of this cast carried stories the cameras never captured. These weren't just actors playing roles. They were human beings facing battles that fame, talent, and success couldn't win. The show gave us fictional justice, but the real world offered its stars something far crueler: the indifference of an industry that consumes talent and discards the broken. Which journey struck you the most? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe as we uncover the forgotten truths behind Hollywood's greatest legends. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that happen after the cameras stop rolling.